Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today I'm here to talk to you about The Years by Ernaux. But before I do, let me tell you a little bit more about this format. This is video 1 of a series of 3 videos, which I will be doing with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts. We're calling this format In Deep Conversation, and in fact we started it last month when we discussed The Topeka School by Ben Lerner. But you don't need to watch those 3 videos to understand what's going on. Let me explain very briefly how this format works, and then I'll go right into it. So this format has 3 videos. So the first video is an introduction by one booktuber. This booktuber will talk about the book, will set out the scene, we'll talk about the major themes, the characters, the style, and then at the end we'll pose a series of questions for the second booktuber. In the second video, the other booktuber will answer those questions, but will also be able to talk about anything they want to about this book, and they'll end the video with their verdict and a series of questions to send back to the first booktuber. And then in video 3, the booktuber who kickstarted the series will answer those questions, give his or her final verdict on the book, and then that's it. You, as a viewer, can comment on any of the 3 videos, on all of the 3 videos, on none of them if you don't have anything to say. But the idea is that you would have something to say, that you would get involved with us, and we'd be able to go so much into a book that you will have the chance to say what you think in the comments. We'll come back on the comments. Sarah and I, in this case, the booktubers involved, as the case may be, will go in, check each other's messages, and reply to booktubers who engage with the material. So last month we did some kind of an episode 0 or a pilot with the Topeka School. Both Sarah and I were very pleased with how the format went. We're very happy with the results. So we decided to come back in February and do another one with The Years. And in fact, we both read the Topeka School and The Years at the same time. It was all part of a 2-book buddy read that went so well that we wanted to do something for you guys with it. So in this case, I'm the one who kicks it off. I'm gonna talk about The Years in a second. By the time you finish this video, you should be able to go into Sarah's channel and watch her video response. Or you can stay on my channel and just check the playlist. Both of our channels will have exact same playlist with all the videos in this series. Now, depending on when you're watching this or Sarah's response video, the third video from me, the wrap-up, may or may not be available. But the best way to know is to check the playlist or simply go into the description box, because the date when the third video will be released will be there from the moment this one is. Confused? You should be. No, I'm kidding. I hope this makes sense. I hope this is simple. I'm sorry for the long introduction. Let me now go into The Years by Ernaux. So why this book? Why The Years by Ernaux? Well, it's a memoir written by a gifted writer. It comes highly recommended. It was hugely successful and critically acclaimed in France when it first came out in French in 2016. And it has continued to be critically acclaimed by English language critics in 2019. One thing that personally appeals to me about this particular memoir is that it's a working class memoir. It's a memoir of a working class person. The first time I heard about this book and this author was from Edouard Louis. Edouard Louis is a promising young writer from France. He has written 2 novels, both of which are available in English, and I couldn't recommend them enough. The first one was The End of Eddie, and the second is History of Violence. When he was promoting History of Violence, he talked about Ernaux as a huge influence. They have several things in common. They're both working class in origin. They both use elements from their own life into their fiction, in this case, memoir, in the case of Edouard Louis into his novels. And they come from very similar ideological leftist side of the spectrum. But this is a woman's perspective. So you have a working class woman, Ernaux, telling you about her own life, and that is so rare. I think working class narratives written by men are a lot more common. Now, you can have working class narratives written by women, but they tend to be written by posh women who have not a clue of what they're talking about. So this is added value to this book. Also, I knew, or at least I suspected, that this would be really well written. So I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. I've been wanting to read this book for many years. So when I had the chance to do a buddy read with Sarah, I suggested it, and I was so glad that she accepted. And reading this book together was a huge experience. So what is this book about? Well, it's the memoirs of Annie Ernaux. So she takes a really long time period of her life between 1940, which is her childhood, and also the beginning of World War II until 2006, when she's a fully matured woman in every sense of that word. So the scope is phenomenal, and she traces all the societal changes in Europe, but particularly in France in all those decades from her very own perspective as a working class girl who then becomes consumerist woman in the 20th and the 21st centuries. The book deals with a lot of themes. I think the most important theme is the collapse of Catholic morality. And I'm making this video from a country where Catholic morality was also big. And in fact, it lasted a lot longer here than it did in France. So I know a little bit of what she's talking about. Not, thankfully, because of personal experience as such, but also from talking to people like my mom. So I know what Annie Ernaux is talking about when she talks about the collapse of that morality here. And we see how that happens gradually, particularly from 1968, so the late 1960s into the 70s and then in the 80s, and how that transforms itself more into consumerism in the 1990s. And I think that gain of personal freedom is also a major theme in this book, and it's fascinating how she equates the growth of personal freedom with consumerism, and there's a critique there implicit to the system that I thought was fascinating. And the third major theme in this book, I think, is socioeconomic determinism, how where you're born, where and who your parents are, what your background is, determines very much what your life is going to be, what your morality is going to be, who you're going to grow up to be. It's not to say that it's your fate, because that would take us into the realm of religion and that kind of thing, and she's not really interested in that. I think she has a background in the social sciences, which is something else that links her to her work to the work of Edouard Louis. If you've read French sociologists like, for instance, Pierre Bourdieu, I think she takes a lot from those ideas. I know for a fact that Edouard Louis does, and he's rather explicit about it. I think Annie Ernaux is a little bit more subtle, and therefore perhaps more accessible to the average reader. Not to say that Edouard Louis isn't, I think he is too, but I think this particular book, The Years, is very accessible, and you don't need to know anything about sociology to get it, but I think the book clearly, and the author herself, has a background in sociology. The structure is very simple, and it works. It serves the book really well. She begins by looking at some pictures, and the first part of the book really are descriptions of the photographs. The photographs are photographs of herself, but she talks about the girl that she sees in those photographs in the third person. At some point she transitions into we, into the first person plural. And she does that in such a subtle way that I can't even pinpoint exactly when she does it. And I didn't notice until I had been reading several pages when she used we, and then it dawned on me that she had changed the personal pronoun. The book starts off being very fragmentary, which can be confusing to some readers, but then the story comes together and you can work out for yourself that you are following the life of one particular girl. And technology is really important here, because she starts by describing photographs, but at some point she moves on to videotapes. So you can see how technology also determines the way in which we think about the past, in which we reconstruct the past. And a lot of this book is Annie Ernaux trying to piece together her own past. And by her own past, I mean her own personal past, but also her social, her political past, the past of her country. There's a lot of French history here, but it all comes from one specific female perspective. Something that is fascinating about this book is that Ernaux takes herself almost as a case study. So you could take this book as a sociology book, as I said earlier, but don't be put off by that, because it's a pleasure to read this book. It's so well written. You won't notice what she's trying to do. You will just be fascinated learning so much about France, learning so much about this girl's life. And you will never know her name. And of course, she's Annie Ernaux, but it's the Annie Ernaux that Annie Ernaux has imagined, has reconstructed, has remembered. And in fact, at the end of the book, she reflects on her creative process, which is something that would set this book apart from any other example of memoir or autofiction that I have ever read. So that's really all you need to know about this book going in, I think, or perhaps if you've read it, you already knew this, but I think those are the main things to set up this conversation with Sarah. So to move things on, I have a few questions for her. So let me just ask them. So the first question that I have for you, Sarah, is what do you think about the structure describing photographs, then moving on to videotapes, etc.? Did it work for you, or did you find it disorienting? The second question is, this book is dense in references to French contemporary history, politics, and culture. As an American reader, did this get in the way of your enjoyment of the book, or did it add to it? High levels of consumerism came to France and the rest of Europe several decades after they did so in the USA. What is your reaction to the not so gradual appearance of consumerism in French life as described in the book? What do you think about the way the protagonist deals with Catholic prudishness? So the year spans from 1940 to 2006, and it moves from the personal to the communal. Yet, it is not a big book. Can you talk about how you feel about that? Overall, Sarah, I want to know what's your verdict on this book. And finally, do you have questions for me? What are they? I'm gonna sit here, wait for your questions. I can't not wait to find out what you want me to talk about in my final video. And to you guys, thanks for watching this first video on The Years by Ernaux. Sarah's response is available right now. So you can do three things. You can check a link on the description box to this video. You can go to the playlist on my channel, or you can just head over to Sarah's channel right now. The third video with my wrap up will be available soon. In fact, it may already be available depending on when you're watching this. So again, check out the checklist or the description box for the specific date when the video will become available. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye bye.